Hello, everybody. Welcome on the LightsOnData show. Today, we're going to see what it takes to break into data science in 2023. And our amazing guest is Andrew Jones, who has over 15 years of experience in data science at companies including Amazon and Sony PlayStation. I know he interviewed thousands of data science candidates, and in doing so, he was learning exactly what can differentiate a standout and a successful candidate from the rest. So, luckily for all of us, he did create, and now he's leading a data science course at Data Science Infinity, which is receiving amazing feedback every single day from its students and really help them to land great roles in the field. Welcome, Andrew.
Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's awesome to be here.
It's awesome to have you. Before we go and dive into our topic for today, can you share a quick fun fact about yourself, whatever comes to mind?
Yeah, honestly, like I've been saying to people recently, my life is pretty tied up with either data science or my family. An interesting fact about me is just that I'm taller than average. I'm a bit of an outlier if we're being statistical. I did a talk last year in Dubai at a conference, and I spent the first 10 minutes just talking about how tall I was compared to people in varying countries. It was like the longest icebreaker ever. But I think the one I remember was, I think it was Ecuador. I believe I was something like 5.4 standard deviations taller than the mean, which meant that only 1 in 13 million people, 1 in 13 million adult men would be taller than me. And the whole population of the country there was 11 million. Like, statistically speaking, I would be the tallest person in the whole country.
Wow.
But obviously that's where statistics falls over, because I'm probably not, but somewhat interesting.
I like how that also ties in with really your skill, experience, and passion in data science, which I think it's a great segue to my next question.
Start by, if you can tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I have a bit of an interesting path into data science, what we call data science now. So university back in New Zealand, I did a degree in marketing and I did a degree in psychology. So not STEM tech related skill sets. And then but I've always been into mathematics and things. It was always something which I had a passion for, but I didn't necessarily study it. And then I was just playing cricket with a group of my friends, and one of the people in the team was hiring for a role at a telecommunications company for a data analyst. And I was about to graduate from university, and I just happened to be talking to him about how I had studied marketing and how we did a little bit of statistics and the psychology side of it, but I loved math. And he said, well, you should apply for this marketing analyst role. So I applied for it and just happened to land that role, not knowing that you could code for a job, not knowing anything about SQL or SAS or Python or anything like that. And I picked up a little bit of SQL and SAS in the role, and I just fell in love with it. I loved the fact that you could manipulate data and that you could understand what customers were doing. And then when I got shown like a churn model, which was using logistic regression to predict which customers would most likely leave the company in the next month, and then seeing those results come through, and it was true. This huge proportion of the people who were highly likely to leave did leave. It blew my mind. It just seemed like voodoo magic. And so I dove into it, and I just wanted to know more and more. So from there, I continued in different analytical roles. I moved over to London, where I really only planned to stay for a couple of years, but have now been here for 14 years and worked in this analytical roles. But every sort of move that I made, a move more towards machine learning and more towards data science, until a few years ago now, I was lucky enough to work for Amazon for a couple of years, and then Sony PlayStation, where I was doing sort of machine learning consulting in a prototyping role, trying to come up with really interesting and powerful features that we could add to the PlayStation 5, which was about to be released. So that was cool. And then in March of 2020, when everything was starting to turn upside down and lockdowns were coming in, my role at Sony ended because of some sort of tax changes in the country, which meant consulting and contracting roles couldn't really continue the way they were. And I'd always really wanted to do something on my own, whether that was my own sort of analytical consulting company or maybe creating a course. And I knew that over my career, I'd been putting away all of these code snippets and descriptions of how things worked just for my own understanding. And I thought, I have that as an asset. And then also this fortunate position that I'd been in, and you mentioned this in the intro, it's not something that I necessarily would have ever chased doing, but I'd been fortunately been put in the position of interviewing hundreds and hundreds of data analysts and data scientists at these top companies. And I really enjoyed that process, and I loved getting to know what it was that did differentiate candidates who go on to get the role from those who unfortunately miss out time and time again. So I had this sort of the technical side of it as an asset, and I had this almost unique experience of interviewing so many people and really being heavily invested in that side of it. And I thought maybe there's a gap in the market. And then when I thought from that interviewing experience, I have seen this huge disconnect between people coming into interviews and not really having the skill set that's required, or not being able to showcase the skills that are required to go on and get the role or be successful in the role longer term. So I thought, well, I've got these sort of experiences and all of this content which I could turn into useful tutorials or whatever it may be. Plus, I know there's a gap in the market here because I've seen it firsthand over and over. So I started squirreling away some sort of ideas and creating tutorials, and I thought it was going to take about 2 months to create a curriculum. And 7 months later, with no income, month after month going, it's almost there, it's almost there, it's almost there, I released the first iteration of Data Science Infinity. And then that's been my life and my full-time job since that moment. And the first year was a massive learning curve, not less so from the data science point of view, more so from the running a business yourself point of view.
Yeah.
And then, so it was a bit of a battle in year one, and Data Science Infinity did well, students did really well. But year two has been a whole different ball. Students are getting so many amazing results now, consistently landing good roles. I've added a huge amount of content to the course. I feel much more confident making tutorials, helping people with their resumes and their portfolios and whatnot. It's really grown, and I'm looking to really grow it again in 2023.
Very inspiring, as Timothy Dobbins is mentioning here, indeed. And I gotta say, you've really, just the feedback that I'm seeing on LinkedIn of people that have taken your course is just fantastic. And what I really appreciate about your course is that you keep on adding to it. I think recently you've added a Tableau module, and I know you have plans on adding even more content. So it's an ever-growing course and always delivering more and more value to its students.
Yeah, that was a big part of what I wanted to build at the start, because a couple of years ago, and it's still the case today, there's no shortage of data science courses which promise the world. Become a data scientist in 6 weeks, or learn data science in 2 months. And they're almost cash grabs, to be honest. They're relying on the data science name, but they teach you some basic skills, not necessarily the ones that are required in the field. And then all of a sudden at the end, 6 weeks is up, the course is done, and you don't know what to do. And I talk to so many people who've done those courses, and they say, I've interviewed for 100 roles and I've got nowhere. I've interviewed for 200 roles and I've got nowhere. And it's exactly what I was seeing when I was interviewing people. So what I wanted to do was go completely the opposite direction, which was, it's not just a fixed, these are the skills you need, and it's all over in 6 weeks or 3 months or whatever. It's a journey. There's no sort of destination. It is a journey, and you will be on there the whole time, and I will be on there the whole time with you. And interestingly, in theory, that's quite a bad business decision for me, because it's not scalable to have people on there, and an ever-growing community of people who rely on you every day to ask questions. And this sounds like the most cheesy marketing line ever, but my whole business model has to get students results, because as soon as they get a job, they don't need me anymore. So busy doing their job that that time resource doesn't come to me anymore. It might do every so often, but if I can get them the result, then they only need me once a month or whatever it may be, and I can bring a whole lot more students in. Yeah, it seems like a really cheesy marketing cliche to say that the business model is get students results, but it has to be. It's the only way my business can work.
And they get great results. I've seen some testimonials, and they really speak for themselves. So I think it's amazing. Besides being inspiring, I can assume it's very satisfying for you as well to see that you are basically changing people's lives. Well, let's dive right into it. So what skills and experience are needed in order to break into the field of data science?
So that is the number one question that I would get from aspiring data scientists is, what do I need to learn? Because there is an ocean of things that you could learn. Nobody in the field, even the people at the very cutting edge, none of them know everything because there's too much. It breaks off into all of these different areas. Data science is such a broad term these days. But if you're looking to learn, you can really focus on the core foundational skills. So for Data Science Infinity, also, I didn't want to base any of this sort of advice just on my own opinion, because again, like my height, I like to think about it in statistical sense. You wouldn't trust a data scientist who had a sample size of 1, would you? So I don't want to go out with advice saying, this is what you have to learn. So I have a sort of ongoing dialogue with hundreds of hiring managers and leaders and recruiters in the field of data science and data analytics, always trying to keep up with not only what are the skills that you are actually using to add value, not the ones that pop up on the social media feed all the time, because that is a warped view of data science. That's the cutting edge algorithms and techniques and projects. The things that you need if you're a new data scientist, they're not changing that much. They're the real foundational ones. So you need to learn SQL. I think when I ask hiring managers, does your team use SQL for data science? It's something like 97%. There's only a sort of a niche group that might be doing computer vision projects and they never need SQL. So SQL, absolutely. In the course, I teach Python as the second programming language. I'm not one to get into the Python versus R debate. I actually learned R first, and then I moved over to Python. The reason I teach Python in the course is because hiring managers have said, the data says that more data science teams are using Python than using R. To be honest, you can pretty much do the same things using either language, give or take a few sort of more nuanced things, but Python is more common, so I teach it. And again, you don't need to know everything when you get started. If you can even start with things like NumPy for sort of mathematical processing and arrays, and then pandas for data manipulation, and matplotlib for visualization, and then there's base Python as well, understanding loops and list comprehension and that sort of thing. That's enough to get you going, because you can manipulate data and you can take on projects. And then from there, I think you absolutely, and you can never get around this, you do need some knowledge of some mathematical concepts and statistical concepts. But again, that is something which they hit a wall when they're learning it, because it's made so dry and bland. And there's a lot of people who say, if you haven't studied all of statistics, then you can never be a data scientist. There's a lot of sort of gatekeepers in that statistical side of data science. And I don't think that's true. I think there are absolutely fundamental things you need to know. So, how to understand data at the very basics. So mean and standard deviation and things like that. But then moving into like hypothesis testing and A/B testing, how can you understand what the impact was after some sort of event, and understanding which one of those hypothesis tests to use? And that is almost bread and butter stuff for any data analyst and data scientist. So you want to be really familiar with those things. But and in Data Science Infinity, I do teach a statistics section, and I'm actually going to release a re-recorded version of that onto YouTube soon, in a way that's hopefully much more interesting than the way you might learn it normally. So more intuitive and understandable and application driven, because I've found learning statistics to be a real slog, because it's always done in the sort of language of complexity. It's always just Greek letters thrown at you, and they are important to understand that. But what if we can do that, but also turn that into words where we understand what it means when this side goes up and this side goes down? It mean in practice. So long story short, statistics and math. And if you're feeling a little bit unsure about learning those, then just try and find resources which make it really intuitive. That's quite important. What else? I think you need to probably learn something like, or at least understand something like GitHub, or a similar product to that, where pretty much all data science teams these days are storing their code and manipulating things and working together in collaborative ways. And then I think you need to probably get a good grasp on sort of areas like data cleaning, data governance. We can probably agree that's important. Data visualization, ways that you can show a story using the data that you have in a way that not only shows the key point that needs to get across, but also can convince people of things or inform stakeholders to make the right decision. That's a really key part of being a data scientist. Data preparation, so similar to data cleaning, understanding what sort of things can trip you up. And then once you've got that foundation, then you can get into machine, because you've got that fundamental knowledge of how you can make the data work for the machine learning models. And then from there, maybe you can then keep moving into something like deep learning. But I would do it in that order. I would never skip straight to something like deep learning. So yeah, a couple of programming languages, SQL and Python, statistical knowledge of the right things that people are using in practice, things like GitHub, and then, data cleaning preparation, and then machine learning and deep learning. That would give you a really good foundation to go in any direction in the field from there.
Thank you so much for that thorough overview,
Yes,
Andrew.
exactly.
Adam is mentioning that if you can't do SQL, then you should just forget about almost anything to do with data. And he's tried both Python and R and then just can't do it. He says, I'll never be a programmer. Never say never, and definitely not until you've taken Andrew's course, because he just simplifies things for you. So give that a try.
I agree though. Like I said, 97% or something of hiring managers say that their team is using SQL. And when I was at Amazon and when I was doing machine learning at PlayStation, I was using SQL still. Like I was always using SQL to get some data or understand the data before doing something in Python.
Yeah. So what really makes a candidate that stands out? If they do have some of this stuff, they do have the skills and the resume, how can looking through
yourself
apart. Really hundreds of resumes that are coming in that do have these skills, what would set somebody apart?
What you do get is, for a data science role, they're very popular, so you do get 100 resumes come through, and a lot of the time they will all look very similar in terms of the skill set. So in terms of a resume, what I really want to see is not just a list of skills, not just a bullet point list of skills. It's not the things, it's the things you can do with those skills. If you can portray that, you're going to go a long way. You're going to go to the top of the pile, because if you reverse engineer the problem, you've got a hiring manager sitting there who's looking to hire somebody for a role in their team. They're not doing that just to give away business money. They're not doing that for fun. They're doing that because they're under pressure and they don't have the resource. So they need somebody to come in to solve certain problems that they have. So if you think, I need to show them that I can solve problems, that's got to be your number one way of thinking. So obviously you want to tell them the skills you have, but that should be quite short. It's all about, for every sort of project you add on your resume, think about having 3 sentences, boil it down to 3 sentences. So what was the problem that you were taking on? That can be 1 sentence. What did you do? That can be 1 sentence. And you can include things like the type of machine learning model you used or the programming language you used. And then thirdly, you want to cap that off with what was the outcome, or what was and if you can use tangible figures, that makes it even more impressive because it makes it more real. They can start subconsciously tying the things that you're doing to the problems that they have. But what you get is 95% of resumes just say, these are the things I can do, and these are the projects I've done, but it's just, this is what I did. I used a random forest to do this, and I got this score. And if you're a hiring manager, that doesn't subconsciously tie with how that person can solve your problems and make your life easier or make you money or whatever it is. So if you can give that context, what was the business problem, what you did, and then what the outcome was, that's going to start ticking boxes in the hiring manager's mind. And it's the same when you go into an interview. You want to be thinking about not just telling them things, but describing the problem, showing them then what you did, and then showing the outcome as well. If you can do that, all of a sudden, like I say, they're starting to think of you as somebody that can solve the problems they have. And as soon as you can show that you can solve somebody's problem, then you become very appealing to them. And that's when you land a job.
I love it.
Yeah.
Sage advice, and I think it can be applied to any job that you apply for, right?
Yeah. I've got like a system that I created around all of this in Data Science Infinity called the Craig system. And I've got a little caricature of me with a big mustache in it. And this is Craig. It's to make sure that the reason I use this really silly image is not because it's a silly topic, is I want to burn that image into people's minds. So when they're in the hot seat of an interview and they're stressed and they're worried about their answers, that this image of me with this big mustache is never going to leave them. And it's the 5 letters of Craig. It's C as context. So, what was the problem you're solving, or why did you need to solve it? R as roles. So what did you do and what did other people do? Which is really important when you answer a question. It doesn't need to be a huge in-depth answer, but it is important. Then you've got A as action, so the things you actually did. I is impact, so what the result was. And then a really important one is G, which is growth. And this is something that almost nobody does. And if you do it, or if you can talk about it, then it puts you right ahead of anybody. And it's thinking, so if you had more time, what would you do? What would you do differently now? Because a lot of your projects might have been a year ago and you've progressed since then. So what would I do now that I wouldn't do then? Or what have I learned since then that I would do differently? And that can be really powerful to hiring managers, because they see not only you know how to solve a problem, but they can see that you're a person that's always growing, and you're somebody that always pushing the boundaries, and you're always looking to improve. And that's like nectar to a hiring manager. They're just going to love to see that.
Now, there are a few comments here about chat GPT. And the first one is coming from Kate, and being that it's 2023, really, how do you think ChatGPT can help people break into data science? Do you see a role for it? Have you had a chance to play with it?
I have played around with it, and I've played around with some of the other stuff that OpenAI have as well. So they've got some really cool things like their embeddings, which is like the middle part of a model that takes text, squishes it down, and then uses it again. And you can use those to do like sentiment analysis or whatever. They've got some really cool stuff. For ChatGPT, so I'll get to Kate's question in a second. I think it's a really interesting scenario that we're in at the moment. I think people shouldn't be afraid of ChatGPT. It's not going away. There's never going to be a stop to progress that happens. I don't think it's going to steal any jobs. Really don't. I think we should embrace it and we should use it. It's one of the most incredible things that I've ever used or seen. It is such a big step. But in saying that, it also has its weaknesses, or not necessarily weaknesses, sort of limitations compared to a human who's a data scientist or whatever, who's embedded in a business and understands the business. So it can answer a lot of questions and it will generate things. It doesn't necessarily understand fully what it's saying, but it's generating things. And it has a way of doing that very convincingly. It can do it with code, and it can do it with all sorts of other things. It's amazing. But it doesn't necessarily know what questions to ask. It doesn't understand what the business problems you're facing. So if I think of me as a business, I'm not a business like Sony or Amazon, but I am a business. ChatGPT can do some amazing things to generate things for me and make my life easier, but it doesn't know the problems I'm dealing with in the business. Only a data scientist or whoever else in business can really understand the context of what we're trying to do. And then you can use something like ChatGPT as a tool to do that better or do that faster. So I don't think it's going to necessarily take jobs. I think it's a really good tool to augment yourself with in data science, and it can provide you code, and it's only going to get better. But for Kate's question specifically, how can people use it to help them break into data science? It will create code for you, but it doesn't just give you the code. It gives you explanations of what the code is doing. And it gives you like subheadings within the code, like comments in the code, which tells you what each section is doing. And that's really powerful. From the test that I've done, most of the time it's given me code which is about 90% good. So I can take that and then apply it to my use case, and I probably save myself some time. So that's a huge win, but I don't think any company is going to be printing out code from ChatGPT and putting that straight into production. I think that's a disaster waiting to happen. But A, it's going to get better. But B, I think it's less good for creating perfection. It's good for creating things that are useful for us to then take and say, I know why that's not going to work. You could use it to help you write a resume, perhaps, or get tips on how to write your resume. But I would not back that to do a perfect job, because obviously you're then giving that resume to a human who has a sort of a different view on things. So I would still rely on human intuition, perhaps.
Yeah. Unless that humans also passes on that resume to ChatGPT.
Yeah, 100%. It's a very interesting time that we're in.
Yeah, like Dan Everett is mentioning, AI isn't going to steal your job. A human using AI might.
Interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I've seen that comment around as well. It's really popular. I think it's a good way to think about it.
Yeah, definitely. There's rumors of Microsoft trying to integrate that in their Office suite and Word and whatnot, bringing Clippy back, like a smarter Clippy. I don't know if you all remember
Clippy,
that.
Yes, that's a pretty low baseline. That little paperclip. I think anybody could do better than that. But
he could turn himself into a bicycle, though.
Right.
I remember that.
Right. We had a lengthier question here from Arunima, and she's wondering, when she's applying to a role, let's say the medical manufacturing company, should she showcase her skills through a project on a medical operations topic, or can it just be through any other topic? So, in other words, the project that she's presenting, does it need to tie into the industry that she's applying into, or it doesn't really matter for a data scientist?
If it's your first role, if you're going into a sort of an entry level or a junior data science role, or even mid-level data science roles, a lot of the time, general projects will be completely fine, because with one caveat, as long as your projects aren't just here's a bunch of code and here's a classification accuracy at the end of it, that doesn't get you a role anywhere. But also it's very specific. There's no understanding that I can get as a hiring manager or an interviewer of your problem solving process. So if I was hiring into, I don't know, a retail business and somebody had done a project in digital or healthcare, but I could read through their project and it was really clearly laid out with a lot of explanations and a lot of thought process around why we're making decisions at certain junctions in that project. Like, why did we choose this algorithm? Why did we need to clean the data in this way? Why did we use this tool versus others? Here are the pros and cons. If you can show that kind of thinking, I couldn't care less what the project was on, because I can see that you could solve any problem that I have because you've got a process in place. And I think that is super key for people to do. Think less about the topic of the project and think more about showcasing the system that you use. I think the reality is, even if you work for eBay and then you're going to applying for a job at Amazon, like they're pretty similar sort of spaces, I would say the chances of you working on exactly the same projects that you've done in the past is probably near nil. You're going to be doing slightly different things. So you can't rely on doing the exact same things over and over again in your career. So that's why I think it's really important to show a system, a problem-solving system where you can weigh things up and justify the decisions that you make along the way. The one exception that I have seen is, interestingly, healthcare, where they do put a little bit more emphasis on healthcare projects. It's not all the time, but I have seen that. They only want to interview people who have either worked in healthcare before or have done sort of the more rigorous statistical work that might be associated with healthcare. So it would depend a little bit with that industry, but for other industries, it doesn't matter so much. It was interesting that it was a healthcare example, because that's the one industry I would have said that I have seen that a little bit.
So now that you're talking about problem-solving skills, my last question that came to mind would be regarding soft skills. Which soft skills would be the most important for a data scientist, and maybe how can candidates work on improving those skills?
So soft skills they're harder to learn and harder to teach than technical skills. Like you're learning Python, it's like, this is the 3-step process that happens when you run this line of code, and it is what it is or it isn't what it isn't. Soft skills are very human dependent, so there's a lot more gray area around it. But I would say and obviously, again, it's hard to teach this. Every time we do a machine learning project, I try and discuss at the end what we could do. What would we go back to stakeholders with? How would we justify what this does and what it can't do yet, or the thinking process around that? Because I think that's really important. I think the one thing I would say would be always, every time you do something complex, because a lot of things that we do in data science, when we're talking to people who aren't in data science, because their mind's not coming from the same place as us. It's not that they're smarter or less smart or anything like that. It's just they've got a different skill set. Try and take that complexity and turn it into something that's intuitive. And if you can work on that skill, taking complexity and simplifying it down to something intuitive, you don't have to dumb it down. It's turning it into something that other people can understand. If you can turn it into something intuitive, then you can communicate it to the right people in the business. Those people then understand what you're doing and get on board with what you're doing. They then trust your skills. They don't trust you to look after their children. They trust you in terms of what you're doing. They believe in you. And if you can build trust with your stakeholders in a business, who are often the ones who give the green light as to whether this project can go ahead and be put on their customers or whatever it may be, because they own those, say they're the head of marketing or the head of product or whatever it may be. If they trust you, then your projects get put into place. And then if they get put into place, then you add business value. And if you add business value over and over again in your career, this interesting thing happens where you get promoted all the time, or you get paid more, or people headhunt you to go to a bigger, better job. But that all boils back to this idea of taking complexity and turning it into something intuitive. So while that's not, I can't give you an ABC on exactly how to do that. It takes a little bit of experience and a little bit of trial and error, and it often depends on your audience. Sometimes people are more technical or less technical. But if you boil that, if you're thinking, how do I move my career forwards in data science? If you go right back to the beginning of that, that trail, it all boils back to this idea of being able to take complexity and turn it into something intuitive. And in my career as a data scientist, I think the best data scientists I've worked with, the ones that I'm always blown away by, are not the ones who are brilliant at coding or brilliant at math. It's the ones who can communicate and turn things into an application-driven, understandable, intuitive. The way they communicate does all of those things. They're the ones who rise through the ranks, and they're the ones who end up getting paid a lot. I think that would be my advice, would be that complexity to intuition.
Great advice, Andrew.
Amazing. I loved it.
As usual. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. I do encourage you to check out Data Science Infinity. Just see how that program would benefit you. And also check out the up-and-coming Data Science Infinity YouTube channel, where Andrew is going in and sharing his expertise, a lot of practical advice and videos and how to do things. So thank you so much for sharing that with the world.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me as well. Yeah, so if you want to look at Data Science Infinity, it's datascienceinfinity.teachable.com. You can go and have a bit of a look. If you have questions, absolutely just get in touch with me via email or on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn all day, every day. And then my YouTube channel is going to be under my name, under Andrew Jones. I really want to build that up into a place that's just adding a huge amount of value. So things like tutorials and project run-throughs and book reviews and everything that's just information that people need in this industry. So I'm really excited about that.
We're looking forward to it as well. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in, for the wonderful questions, and have a wonderful weekend.
Bye, everyone.